Okay, hello everyone. It's hard to know if everyone's back because you've all got your cameras off. But I'm good. Hi, Matt.
I'm here.
Hello. I'm just gonna assume that everyone's back from their breaks and we can kick off with the next presentation, which is Alice Creasy's. So Alice will hopefully be joining for the final discussion. I will. So Alice was on environmental sustainability and was also supervised by Matt. So if you have any questions, then just put them in the chat for Matt to see. Okay. Um,
Hi everyone, I'm Alice and I'm going to be talking about the dissertation that I wrote on the Edinburgh Climate Commission. I was a part-time master's student studying environmental sustainability and I handed in my dissertation back in August 2020. So while the traditional view of climate governance is that of local political action shaped by national policy making and international agreements, in recent years, cities have been seen increasingly as strategic sites for experimentation when it comes to the governance of climate change. In the UK, this devolution of responsibility for climate change has occurred in the context of austerity, which has resulted in the weakening of local states. Against this backdrop, the question of climate change as a kind of explicit agenda for the local scale has taken on a somewhat experimental form, involving a range of place-based, private, public and civil society stakeholders. Reflecting on attempts to deliver this in practice, my dissertation drew from an ethnographic case study observing the establishment of the Edinburgh Climate Commission and its introduction into the city's political and institutional fabric. Developed in partnership between the University of Edinburgh and the City of Edinburgh Council, this commission has been delivered as part of a national network of city-level commissions facilitated through the PCAN project. These commissions are premised on facilitating and catalysing cross-sector collaboration and action on climate change. This research examined the establishment of city climate commissions as experimental means of addressing the challenge of climate change at the city scale. In doing so, it asked the question, what constitutes the necessary diversity of voices and perspectives when trying to represent the climate changing city? Despite its increasing prevalence within both political and societal discourse, the complexity of place in relation to sustainability remains remarkably under-theorised. Sustainability continues to be seen within mainstream circles as a framework for neoliberal development whose focus on issue-based policies often fails to recognise the kind of particularity of individual places and the people and organisms that inhabit them. Taking its inspiration from this critical re-engagement with the importance of place, this dissertation seeks to better understand the way in which a shift to place-based local governance arrangements can deliver the redistribution of power through catalysing action on climate change. So this was a very case study focused project, and it tied very closely to my part-time job on the team in the ECCI setting up the Climate Commission. The research itself took a deeply ethnographic approach to data collection, and data was principally collected via ethnographic field notes collected between October 2019 and May 2020. 11 semi-structured interviews with key individuals involved in the setting up process of the Edinburgh Climate Commission were used to supplement the collected ethnographic material. The analysis of this ethnographic data played out in post-fieldwork discussions which sought to kind of make sense of what had been gathered. These discussions were guided in in large part by the pioneering work of geographer Doreen Massey. Massey advocates for the need to make a distinction between place and a kind of simple locatedness. This distinction recognizes place as part of a broader set of kind of relational networks which stretch and are localized across the world. This analysis has really important implications for the establishment of the Edinburgh Climate Commission, which is a project that is simultaneously embedded in the context of Edinburgh while also remaining kind of tethered to transferable and replicable models of place-based climate governance through the PCAN project. So the dissertation broke the findings down into two kind of ethnographic tales, the first of which looked at the ways in which Edinburgh was kind of conceptualized and imagined by stakeholders setting up the Climate Commission. And the second looked at how this conceptualization of place was represented on the Commission itself. So looking at the conceptualization of Edinburgh, while both mitigation and adaptation are part of the wider aspirations of the PCAN project, in Edinburgh, climate mitigation emerged at a very early stage as kind of the important agenda item for those setting up the Commission. The dominance of this narrative was really catalysed by a piece of work colloquially known as the Mini Stern, which developed an emissions profile for the city broken down by sector and an associated roadmap towards the net zero target of 2030. This very kind of technocratic approach appeals to those who are trying to work at pace and who are trying to provide some kind of tangibility to the messiness of urban landscapes. And it's undoubtedly really important work in slowing the climate crisis. However, while not really in itself a negative practice, when taken in isolation, this focus on achieving a reduction in emissions kind of as fast as possible prevents the city from being looked at with a broader lens, and it risks marginalising a wider set of justice and well-being concerns. As a result, in setting up the Edinburgh Climate Commission, discussions around intersectionality and relationality rarely managed to penetrate the barriers of decision-making processes, which remained confined by bureaucratic challenges of implementation and focused on the issue of emissions and the narrative of a climate emergency. The report's framing of Edinburgh around a series of sectoral emissions profiles also created a very kind of rigid and bounded conceptualization of the city, which really limited intercity communication and has channeled the focus towards quantifiable results at pace. So that brings us to the second tale, which was looking at how this conceptualization of the city became represented on the Commission. So in early 2020, those setting up the Commission turned to the task of deciding who should represent the city on this new entity and how they should be chosen. Overall, selecting individuals with power and influence became a real driving force in the Commission's development, and one that in some cases trumped the inclusion of even quite basic levels of demographic diversity. Commissioners were recruited not really for their embeddedness in place, but more for their social power and their kind of respective areas of technocratic expertise. There was also a focus on those who were already interested in climate change, rather than hearing from other kind of new or dissenting voices. With this in mind, the recruitment of these individuals became a really important and interesting part of the Commission's story. Rather than use an external application process, commissioners were identified either by their public profiles, such as LinkedIn, or through personal connections. Often these connections would be with the stakeholders who were actually involved in setting up the Commission. This very kind of informal recruitment process was chosen in part because it was seen to be faster and more efficient than a kind of more formal application process. However, it did mean that the selection of commissioners was limited to a fairly homogenous and socially elite set of networks. The focus of this research has been the question of how place-based climate commissions as experimental forms of urban climate governance conceptualise and represent the cities whose future they hope to shape. The findings have shown that the fast-tracked conceptualisation of place, instigated from the top down and structured by the extra-local nature of the PCAN project, has really legitimised a focus on technocratic expert knowledge, which is kind of perceived to be able to deliver kind of measurable impacts and tangible impacts at pace. In doing so, however, it became quite difficult for stakeholders to move beyond a very static and abstract performance of Edinburgh, and stakeholders often failed to acknowledge the kind of more relational and intersectional interpretation of place, which would take seriously the importance of building a diverse ecology of relevant place-based knowledges. At its core, this dissertation argued that this approach to experimental climate governance ends up undermining democracy because of the need to deliver quickly through a body that is institutionally tangible from the outset, rather than working with the grain of place-based messiness and the disruptive place-based agencies that this offers. So thank you everybody for listening, and I'm sorry that I can't be there in kind of virtual person with you all today. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is on the ECCI website, and I'm sure Rosanna, I'm sure Rosanna wouldn't mind passing it on as well. And if anybody would like some gripping bedtime reading, then I'm very happy to pass along my dissertation as well. But yeah, thank you for listening, and good luck with all your research.
Okay, well, a virtual thanks to Alice, who hopefully will be here at the end. I think, Francesca, you're next.
Yep.
So I'm just going to hand over to you straight away. I'll let you introduce yourself. Okay.
So you're working?
Yes.
Great. 1 second. Hi everyone, my name is Francesca and I was a student in Energy, Society and Sustainability last year. And today I'm going to talk to you about COVID-19, cities and Edinburgh. So, does COVID-19 provide a stimulus for cities to finally assemble a new world order? This is how the presentation will be structured: introduction, methodology, findings, discussion and conclusion, classic. And at the end, Q&A, so don't hesitate to ask any questions you have. So, I'm sure most of us can agree that COVID-19 has made us question the way in which our societies function and the assumptions about our societies. And I'm sure most of us can also agree that recently in the news, we've seen that parallels have been drawn between the massive fast-paced change that we as a society have taken because of COVID-19 and the change that we should be enact, massive change that we should enact because of the environmental emergency. In the academic literature, there are two aspects that are relevant for my research about cities. The first aspect is that in the recent narrative, cities have been proclaimed as saviors, as leaders against the climate emergency and against a nation state that has been more or less ineffective to this date. And the second aspect is their the cities have an inherent contradiction, a double nature. On the one hand, they are fundamental sites for capitalism because they are sites of intense production and consumption, hence why they have been hit by COVID pretty hard. And on the other hand, they are sites of disruption where alternative movements can find their best conditions and can flourish. So in my dissertation, I was interested in finding out if cities can use in their post-pandemic future, if they can use this potential that they have as sites of disruption to organize a different society, to assemble a new world order. And I was particularly interested in exploring the alternative movement of degrowth. And for those who do not know, degrowth is a radical idea, radical reorganization of society, which sees, which implies a drastic reduction of production and consumption. And it's an alternative movement in the sustainability debate. The status quo is actually green growth. So green growth, by contrast, identifies the fault of environmental degradation in the market. So in order to solve the problem of environmental degradation, we need to solve the market. We need to create growth from environmentally friendly practices. And so in my dissertation, I was interested in finding out if cities would be able to challenge the status quo, to move away from the status quo and try something different, drive a new trend. And in order to explore this, I looked at a case study, the Edinburgh Green Recovery Report by the Edinburgh Climate Commission. As a methodology, I used discourse analysis. For those who do not know, discourse is a specific ensemble of ideas, concepts, and categorizations that are produced, reproduced, and transformed in a particular set of practices, and through which meaning is given to physical and social realities. So, discourse analysis unpacks the assumptions that are in our discourse, these ideas, these concepts, the norms, the biases that we have. And my discourse analysis was informed, obviously, by the degrowth theory, because I was interested in degrowth. So I took degrowth principles and tried to see if they would fit the discourse that was in this report. My rationale was to understand how the city of Edinburgh has been framed in relation to COVID, in relation to the recovery, and if there is potential for degrowth. And my findings, well, they all show that the predominant discourse for the post-pandemic future for Edinburgh is still green growth. And there's a lot of evidence. So here I'm just showing you some. For example, the use of generalized and mundane rhetoric and language. What I mean is some very general statements that make it seem like green growth is inevitable because they're very hard to disagree with. So you can't really disagree with them. And then another example is the overemphasis on technology and efficiency, on land redevelopment, especially of green spaces, and on urban regeneration. And so what I mean with overemphasis is that a lot of content was about this, but also there was no critical mindset towards, for example, redeveloping land or technology and efficiency. There was no critical point of view. And Other findings I have here, for example, are the abstract actors and abstract idea of place. So in order, abstract actors, basically the actors have been generalized, as you can see from the quotes, everyone or individuals, families, communities, etc. As well as abstract city. So an abstract idea of Edinburgh, I think Alice has shown us that too in the previous presentation. So the lack of engagement with the city, with its problems, with its characteristics, with its character, and all this evidence so far shows us the depoliticization of this report, in the sense that it erases all kinds of disagreement, and in terms of, for example, what people want. I'm sure that the actors do not have the same needs and the same mindsets about sustainability. It erases all kinds of out of the norm perspectives on sustainability, and also all kinds of power relations between the actors. And it makes it sound like green growth is the inevitable consensus. Also, the narrative of governance. So the city is seen as the city of Edinburgh is seen as a powerful entity that can take very powerful actions, as you can see from the quotes. For example, it can set the pace for the climate action ahead of COP26 or lead the debate, and so on. And this has consequences, as I'll explain. Well, there are assumptions in the report and in the discourse about Edinburgh that are an obstacle to a degrowth society and future. And first, the urban governance. So COVID has shown us that the power of nation states is still big, and that urban entities are still weak. And this is in contrast with what's been said in the report. And then the fact that COVID has been romanticized as an opportunity on a positive note somehow, but actually it's only an opportunity for some people, but not everyone has found convenience in COVID. Actually, we know that a lot of vulnerable people have had heavy consequences because of COVID. And then the recovery, the idea of recovery, so of going back to something, we need to recover. It means going back to something. But actually, what I'm trying to argue is that we shouldn't have this assumption of going back to something, but actually going towards something different, something new. And then the assumption of an abstract city works against degrowth, because the lack of politics, the lack of dissent with how sustainability is seen, and the lack of engagement with the characteristics of Edinburgh actually works against degrowth. And so there is a case for degrowth in theory, but the city is embedded with growth, the city of Edinburgh. So in conclusion, well, as I said, the report, the Green Recovery Report, reflects a continuation of the status quo of green growth, with a green spin, so green growth. So despite, in theory, seeing cities as a good scale for degrowth, their degrowth city is extremely challenged by these two factors. First, the fact that growth is deeply embedded in the city discourse. And secondly, the fact that cities have to work within the limitations of the nation state, which is still very powerful and carries the interests of global capitalism. And therefore, I think it is inescapable that the concept of recovery is and will be around growth. The post-pandemic future will be around growth, even if we had such a disruptive event like the global pandemic. And that's it.
Francesca, that was great. The last but not least is Julia, who's managed to join, which is great. Julia, if you want to. Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Okay.
Good. Okay, well, Julia was a carbon management student, and I will let her tell you about her dissertation. So you should be able to share your screen, Julia.
I actually wanted to apologize because I don't have a PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, that's okay.
I wasn't aware that there was supposed to be a presentation. Very sorry. But yes, I'll just explain a little bit overall, and maybe it's a bit shorter than the rest of the rest of the people that have presented.
Yeah, don't worry at all. Just say for context that Julia I think you just started a new job, didn't you?
Yeah, I've been working for a few months now, but I didn't have my university email, which is why I wasn't aware of the presentation.
Oh, it really doesn't matter. But yeah, I'll let you talk.
Okay, great.
It's fine.
Thanks. So yes, as Rosanna said, I was a carbon management student last year, and so my dissertation was on net zero cities. The title was "Can Local Action Push Forward Global Action? A Global Analysis of City Commitments." So this basically is an analysis of city scale net zero goals. There was no necessarily any specific cities that were analyzed. It was more of a global scale analysis. So yeah, first of all, I did a literature review talking about the uses of temperature targets and emission-based targets, and explained a little bit so what the concept of net zero targets was, and how it's been more common recently in cities, countries, and companies, how they're all starting, well, not starting to, but it's more common to hear about these net zero commitments. So yes, so there were so I did a mixture of methodology, sorry. So I did a data set production and 5 case studies. So I chose those 5 case studies based on the data set production that I made. So I created these parameters for the data set to collect the information for the comparison of the commitments. And then they were separated into 4 groups based on the Kluge archetype analysis. So the idealized net zero targets were exemplary, then noteworthy, then limited, and then poor. That's how I categorize them. And yeah, this was to analyze the current net zero targets that cities have. It's hard to say whether they're good or bad targets because they are future targets. This was a bit of a problem not problem, but a bit of like a hard part of my dissertation. It's hard to conclude whether a commitment is good or bad when it's a future target. But based on what they were doing currently, that's how I categorize them. And then my research questions were based around what common ground do net zero cities have? Yeah, so what policies do they have currently? I did this by checking CDP, their government websites. It was all secondary data. I didn't do any primary data. And yeah, so basically my dissertation, what I found was that there's a bit of a disconnect between the global nature of the climate crisis and local scale of the city, of the city targets. And it was a very interesting dissertation to look, because I feel like there's a lot of commitments, net zero target commitments coming up now, especially in the past few months we've been seeing. But yeah, it was an interesting thing to look as a global scale from different cities and different countries. I also looked at which cities had countries that also had net zero targets that they were committing to, and they were being successful. And yeah, that's basically what my dissertation was on. Sorry if I don't have a very detailed presentation, but if any of you have any further specific questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Julia. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's here and everyone who, even though they're not here, pre-recorded a presentation, because I think every single person in the group was doing that around a job that they currently have. So it was really great that they could make a presentation and come today. So thank you. And I think it's time for the second Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, then please just shout out, or Dan, I can read your question for Francesca. I'm going to take silence as agreement. Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Yes, I think Francesca can read my question. So if you're happy to respond, Francesca.
Yes, it's very huge to answer in a few sentences, but so there's definitely, so during the while I was doing my dissertation, I participated to some degrowth to the degrowth conference, which was online this year, and there's absolutely acknowledgement that the pandemic has hit especially the vulnerable in the cities, especially, and the poor people. And the degrowth literature pays a lot of attention to actually inequalities, and especially inequalities that are caused, well, by capitalism. So, for example, it pays attention to, for example, giving more power to local authorities, especially for local community energy, because it sounds like it's the best way to do how to say, to prevent, maybe like a bigger firms or bigger energy actors to actually take over. So it gives a lot of attention to this part, as well as the other part. It gives attention is just the community feeling. So a lot of projects about degrowth are around, for example, I just say one, like community gardens, or like the meeting together and discuss about what we want about climate action. So it's a lot of it is based at the smaller scale. So it's kind of hard, and this is something I found during my dissertation, it's kind of hard to then translate it to the bigger scale. It really needs the help of the national government, for example, in putting restrictions to multinational businesses that don't respect certain standards, as an example. So it's a really big deal. I could talk to you a lot about it, but it's definitely in there.
Okay, that's great. No, it was almost a rhetorical question, and of course a lot of what I really like about the diversity of topics here is that there's quite a few. There's a number of them are quite critical, which I think is very healthy, and and university should provide primary platform for that. But also that we have dissertations that are doing the number crunching on where the carbon emission reductions can come in, and we need all these kind of things. We need the numbers, but we also need to make politics more explicit, because ultimately climate policy is a deeply ethical decision that we're facing, and the dilemma that we now know that the level of damage that we do. We know which bits of the UK are going to be underwater in 100 years from now. Well, we don't know if it's going to be in 100 years or 120 years, but we know what's going to be underwater, even if we stop emissions altogether today. So yeah, I think that creates a really rich environment. So I want to make clear that although most of the so certainly the last set of presentations were quite critical. That's extremely welcome, but it's welcome alongside a whole range of different dissertations that are maybe more pro-business, or maybe more about actual quantification of carbon emissions, etc. So and I'm aware that we have a number of potential supervisors in the room here who would be looking to supervise very different forms of dissertations. I don't know if anyone else got questions. I'm quite keen for for a few other people to say hi and say what they're interested in as potential dissertation topics. I'm aware, of course, I'm looking at Kate Crowley, Alice Haig, if you want to say something about that. I don't know, Yonghwa, would you be interested in supervising dissertation students on adaptation? You've done some really interesting work with the council. And Claire Warmby is an expert on carbon number crunching, and she's got some really interesting topics as well that she'd like to supervise. So I'll be, if we don't have any more questions for the students who presented, then I suggest you guys say hi, if that's okay. Who wants to kick off? Alice Haig, are you okay to start? Sure, I'm happy to talk. Maybe say a bit about yourself. You've done your PhD here in Edinburgh, and yeah, take it. Before that, you did interesting stuff as well. Okay, so I'm Alice Haig. I'm an environmental social scientist at the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen. I finished my PhD in Edinburgh 3, I think, years ago now, where I did some research about environmental politics and how community groups are engaging in climate change in Edinburgh. And so I'm working on a project now with Aberdeenshire Council about how they're developing an adaptation strategy. And one of the interesting things up here is Aberdeenshire, so not Aberdeen itself, but Aberdeenshire, the council nearby, is very rural. It's got huge coastline around the northeast. And it's also, Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire are the home of the oil and gas industry. And lots of people up here are employed in that sector. And so when we talk about transition and climate change, you are very directly affecting some people's jobs and livelihoods. And that's not just people who are employed in the oil and gas sector, but it's also people who, taxi drivers and hotel owners, and there's lots of other HR businesses and things. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. I say I've got this project about how the local council's doing all this, but I'm happy to chat if that kind of oil and gas industry experience maybe speaks to you as well. I'm happy to chat about potential dissertations. Thank you, Alice. Okay. Yonghwa, do you want to say something about your own research interest and what you're doing at the moment with the council?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So my name is Yonghwa. I just finished my PhD. The topic was urban governance, especially around Glasgow City region and Edinburgh City Council. So my focus was trying to measure the adaptation policy progress, whether it's incrementally like improving or making progress, or transformational like changes, what kind of form would be incremental and transformational, try to find an example from both the cities. And after that, I had a couple of months project with the city council, try to find a way to do their risk assessment, scoping down to Edinburgh City region. And I'm still looking for fundings to continue my research. So I'm happy to discuss about urban adaptation, governance, and networking analysis, like everything.
That's great, Yonghwa. I'm going to give the mic to Kate now, because Kate might be able to provide a bit of background information for that. And Yonghwa, I'm also aware that you're doing a report for the council, that we're not doing enough on adaptation, and Kate is an expert on that. So I thought it'd be good for you to follow up, Kate, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. So proud of my carbon management students. Well done. That was really fantastic to hear, about your projects and your experiences. And we'll certainly share the recordings with the carbon management students, the current lot, who are just starting to think about this. But Yeah, so for those who don't know me, I'm Kate Crowley. I'm a lecturer in climate risk and resilience. So I have a specific interest in adaptation, and we're doing a lot of work at the moment in terms of understanding the relationship between risk and adaptation, and trying to help, especially the council here in Edinburgh, understand that relationship and improve their decision-making abilities in terms of identifying good adaptation practice and then trying to implement that. That might sound surprising. It might sound like we should have been further along in terms of adaptation, but it's really quite a new area, and there's so many aspects to do research on. And so that's why you guys as master's students are so important to that journey that we're making. The council are keen to have students work on different ideas, discrete little projects that can really feed in and help them with their understanding of what adaptation is. And the other aspect of some of the dissertations that I get involved in is around disaster management and risk and hazards as well. So we also have interested partners such as Mott MacDonald, who are keen to work with students, identify some challenges that they face. We had 3 students looking at how you can do carbon footprinting for flood defences last year. And that sounds quite dry, but actually it was really interesting, and they came out with some really cool stuff. So yeah, really lots and lots of opportunities. And I also am the co-director of ECCI, and we're super keen to make sure that the more master's students get opportunities to work with some of the agencies based at ECCI as well. So if you're interested in that, then of course drop me a line. And obviously Dan's research recall group is going to also help with this as well. So something to get involved with so that we can all coordinate together. Sorry, that's probably way too much.
Thank you very much, Kate. So Claire, are you there? Are you happy? You send us some great topics for dissertation supervision. Claire's also from ECCI. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Claire Warmby. I am I think at the moment, Carbon Innovation Manager at ECCI. I've got an ever-changing job title.
Congratulations.
I'm not sure, I'm just adding bits to it as I go along. So I used to be Innovation Manager, now I'm Carbon Innovation Manager. So I'm kind of come from the consultancy side of climate change. So I've worked for many years in large consultancies looking at climate change, mainly in the public sector, but some private sector work. And then about a year and a half ago, I joined ECCI to help work with some of the city's projects on area-wide emissions. As Dan said, I'm the data dark side here of unenlightened thought around where are the emissions coming from, how much are they? But in actual fact, what I'm really interested in is how we're able to use data to make better decisions around climate change. So it's my real area of interest is thinking about how do those numbers that we can access and use, how can we make them into better actions and activities on the ground? So I do everything from working with private organisations on the really small sort of like personal carbon footprint calculator side of things, through to public procurement, which I'll mention in a minute, and then on to kind of area-wide, really large scale footprints around Scotland. I've got a couple of projects this year, in particular around procurement in the public sector. There's a huge amount of interest at the moment about how we make procurement of goods and services, how we incorporate climate change into the decision making around that. And at the moment the government there's a whole kind of like, forum working on this. There's various working groups. There's a couple of they're live projects in that we're looking for students who would work on things that would actually probably potentially feed into policy. But in particular, we're interested in things like the procurement of education and social care, which I think are really there's very few people in this space in climate change because, we spent an awful lot of time thinking about construction materials and the carbon embodied in concrete, but we think very little about the carbon embodied in social care, partly because social care is a fundamentally low paid, low valued in society job that's done predominantly, I would say, by women. And therefore I think is really, really undersung area of interest, and I'd be really interested in talking to people about that, as would the Scottish Government. So yeah, that's my pitch.
I think that's just as radical as degrowth, to be honest. So that's really fantastic. I'm conscious, so I see quite a few names that I recognize from Energy Society Sustainability, so very, very welcome. But I also see some names that I don't recognize. I'm equally excited about that. So I will finish up with giving the microphone to Matt and Rosanna. But if there's anyone else who wants to, either they're not a student, they got something else to add on the supervisory or topic side, or they are students and they want to talk to any of the potential supervisors who've already raised their voice now, just say hi, show us your face, wave, and that's a good starting point for a follow-up conversation. So yeah, feel free to just pop in, please. I'll silently count till 10, I think. Hi, Tatsuya.
Hi, I'm a current ESS student. So just I want to introduce myself. And,
great to see you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm from Japanese government, Ministry of Environment. And I'm so interested in energy and society issues. And now I'm considering my dissertation topic. So I just want to say hi. And my current interest is how to optimize and how to allocate government budget to different type of technology, for example, solar power or wind power. That is because I was in charge of R&D project in Ministry of Environment, and I was so struggled to how to allocate the budget. So that is my interest. But I'm so struggling because my background is environmental law. So it's very difficult to run the modeling or environment economics. So yeah, I'm so struggling. And in terms of city problems, I'm so interested in how to calculate and how to track progress, the emission in the cities. There's so many discussion, production base or something. So yeah, that is my interest. So just say hi. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Does anyone want to respond to Tatsuya's topic?
I don't know if Claire might have some things that can be shared, but the Scottish Sustainability Network, which is an agency in the ECCI, have monitoring tools for different businesses and public sector as well. So it might be interesting to look at their website and have a look at their reporting mechanisms. Might give you some ideas. And I really hope that you do a project based in Japan, because that would be wonderful. It'd be really great to get those thoughts and insights. It's one of those countries that's held up in terms of adaptation and disaster management, and so it would be really fascinating to have a place-based study from there. So thank you for sharing that. Sorry, Claire, put you on the spot a bit as well.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. There's a lot of data certainly around the kind of monitoring reporting that we're trying to make sense of in Scotland, and trying to pull into some sort of almost like a data factory that people can start using in a more sensible way in the future. But certainly on the SSN website, there's all of the public bodies in Scotland report every year on an annual basis on their climate impacts. And there's a massive data set available there that's really collected but not analysed for the vast majority of it. So I think it would be, but I mean, I think there's all energy systems and the carbon accounting around that is always kind of ripe for projects as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a relevant dilemma, and in every national and every local government, of course. How do you allocate your limited budget to these conflicting priorities? Where do you find synergies, etc.? So it's widely recognizable. I think if you don't have the deep economic or carbon accounting expertise, you can still study what's been done elsewhere, what kind of values are weighted more than others, are short-term priorities overriding long-term ones, etc. So even if you don't, the short answer is that we don't have a ready-made solution. If we had, then we'd be doing it. But you can study what's happened so far and how priorities were allocated, and from that derive at least some wisdom about lessons learned and where we should do better than we've done in the past. And I think you can be great to situate that in Japan, but I think you can draw from examples internationally about how these decisions are being made and these trade-offs are being negotiated. Thank you. Anyone else from the currently people with the cameras switched off? Okay. Then I'm just going to wrap up by asking Matt if he has anything to add, and then I will let Rosanna close off with the usual thank yous and what you're going to do with the recordings, etc. Matt, please.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. I'm just make sure there's no other students from this year's cohort who want to ask questions. So if they do come up, stop me, and that's really important. But I think it'd be great just to. We didn't plan to sort of do a discussion session as such, but I've just sat here whenever all the students were presenting, and it became very clear to me in a way that it hadn't before, some of the things that connect them all together. And so I thought it'd be really useful from the perspective of demonstrating the value of working as a group of students, that it can, the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. And so, and special thanks to Julia, particularly for joining us from last minute from her job. But I think Julia's project took a very particular high-level look at the concept of net zero in cities and the disconnect between the idea of a planetary challenge in climate change and taking action against that at the local scale. And then if we sort of drop down to that scale, Rob's dissertation is a fantastic example of how nuanced we need to be when we approach this concept of climate change at the place-based local scale. I think Kate's question to Rob really drew that out nicely. And Rob's work, and Rob's hopefully soon will have a book chapter published that demonstrates this, illustrates how we need to be approaching something like the private sector with a lot more nuance than we currently do. But then Alice and also Francesca's dissertations illustrate the difficulties in doing that. Right? There's a lot of forces that exist in the world that are framing problems in certain ways and erase that nuance. I think Claire had put a comment in the chat about how challenging that can be. And then we have Muki's talk, which offered a completely different perspective on how we might think about these issues differently. And so what we have there is this collection of students who started with broadly similar interests, but diverse perspectives on them. And it's only now that I've sat here and listened to them in this sort of removed objective sense that I've seen that actually they all sit really nicely together and paint a sort of complex, comprehensive picture, which I think is a really, really nice way to think about the value of doing these dissertations, not as isolated projects, but as part of something a little bit bigger. So yeah, that was mainly all I wanted to sort of say. And so I think the plan, Rosanna can correct me if I'm wrong here and keep me right as she always does, but we are going to circulate a series of themes that we'd like to work potentially with students on, connected to all the topics that you've heard from the people who were just speaking a short while ago, to try and identify students who might be interested in working with us, who want to develop some of these ideas a little bit further. And I want to thank Alice Haig as well for asking Rob and Muki earlier a really important question, which is how these ideas come to life. And I think it's always a middle ground. I think we can present a certain set of themes, a certain set of research projects that we're involved with at the university, but we equally need enthusiastic students who come and take them in new directions and deliver really interesting projects as a result. So it's something that only works if both sides are committed to doing that. And I think that given this was the first time we've done this, or certainly the first time I've been involved in doing this, it was a really, really valuable resource for all of us. And I would be, delighted if we were able to get a group of students who are interested in doing something similar this year. So I'll stop there and hand back to Rosanna to finish us off.
Very quickly before you go, Rosanna. So thanks, Matt. That's really good. We're also extremely grateful to. This was experimental. We didn't know how this was going to work. It seemed like a good idea. From my perspective, I can say with 2 hands on my heart that it seemed to work extremely well. I'm sure there's stuff we can improve upon. Any reflections, suggestions, stuff that we didn't cover, stuff that you want us to cover next time, drop us an email, put something in the comment box. I'll be extremely welcome, because we're going to run this again next year, and it'll be obviously I'm incredibly grateful for everyone who spoke right now, and I've learned a lot. But yeah, if we want to grow, then obviously we need your feedback and suggestions. And yeah, last but not least, I'm going to give it back to Rosanna, who's organized this, and thank you so much, Rosanna. Thanks all the speakers.
Thanks. I'm actually just trying to think how best to circulate this Excel. I'm going to put a link in the chat to a Google Doc. I think the best way to do it might be if you go to the Recall website and sign up to the mailing list, then I'll circulate it through that mailing list. And I can also send it to program directors, so they can send it to you as well, if that sounds good to everybody. And basically, you can see from the Google Doc, but there's sort of the 5 broad themes that we think supervisors and the people invested in this project are interested in. And if you're interested in them too, just add your name and email address. And if you have any questions, then please contact me. I'll put my email in the box as well. And I think that's really it. And all I was going to say was thank you so much again to the presenters. And it was really nice to hear that everyone had a good time in the group with me and Matt. I definitely really enjoyed it as well. So that was great. And thank you all for coming and giving up some of your Wednesday afternoon. And yeah, stay safe out there, and hopefully see you all soon. Oh, and finally, thank you to everyone from external to the university and Claire, who gave up her time as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Rosanna.
Clap.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rosanna.